Welcome back everybody, I'm Carter Sandvin and this is the channel for Sandbox Illustration. I have one pretty good announcement to make during this. Coming tomorrow are some clothing racks, and I'm going to use those to hold up my curtains that I had before, or at least I had the one that was sprawled up over my bed in my previous setup so that you didn't see my bed and my clothes and stuff. But now I'm gonna bring it back, and I actually wanted to completely cover the back here. I want the whole background to just be the red curtains, and so the garment racks that I'm getting for those, garment racks. I'm either British or grandma now. No, but the clothing racks are gonna be showing up tomorrow, and so every video from now on, hopefully 2 videos from this one, will have the brand new background of the solid red. I think it'll be a really nice way to clean up my whole video setup, and plus it'll actually make it easier. If you guys ever noticed, I try to sit over on this end, so then I leave this wide open for my webcam and stuff like that. In fact, I should probably sit like that right now. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say. We will get right into the video. This video is gonna kind of be a sequel to my 2 junk pile videos. In this one, I'm going to be talking about writing, just all of writing. Going to be getting into a lot of the details that I use when it comes to writing. And you know what? In this video, if any of you are struggling with writing, or you want to get into it but you don't really know what to do, or you're trying to write your own stories as well, then I'm here to tell you
that your stories fucking suck. You come to me thinking that garbage on a Word document is a fucking story? I look at you and I'm fucking boy. If you ever come to me with that shit again, I will fucking pee.
Oh, okay, dial it back a little bit. Okay, start over. Let's come back to it.
If you ever come back to me with that fucking garbage again, then I will take that Word document, throw it in the garbage can, and then give you the garbage can as a birthday present, just to really show you what that story is. Don't come at me with that bullshit.
And then once we're done with that, I will teach you some of my own writing tips. No, to be serious here though, I do want to say that this video, I don't want to promote these ideas that I have or tools as anything that will for sure make a good story. This is just from my own experience in writing and what I have learned. Someone out there may think that it is complete dog shit what I am talking about. You know what, man? That's okay, because the stories that I've crafted so far with my own tools, I think they've gone really well. And if some people write differently, absolutely that's okay. Everybody's got stories out there that have a different process behind them. So I don't want to pitch this video as like a how to write video, more just what I have learned from writing, that sort of thing. In fact, I even changed it a little bit, because when I first came up with this concept idea, it was called like my writing tips or how to write, but I wanted to change it to what I learned from writing, because first off, I don't have much experience in writing like at all. I've only like semi-written a few stories. Like I've got a bunch of stories that I've crafted, but when it comes to like actually writing them and creating them, I haven't even gotten that far yet. So these are just things that I have learned when it comes to general story making and making an entire story a collective unit so that nothing feels out of place, nothing takes away from the screen time or anything like that, or the reader's time, and overall just making sure that you are watching one tight story, if you know what I mean. So we will get right into those. First though, I'm gonna go get a soda. Hey yo, Jerry Cook. Starting off, I want to give a little recap when it comes to my history with writing and all that, and then I've got some other points that will come with that. When it came to me making my art as a kid, I didn't just want to make my art. I originally wanted to be an animator. In fact, I wanted to work at Cartoon Network and make my own TV show. Then after that, I kind of learned that, you know, oh, but when it comes to animation now, it's not as handheld, so it's not going to be as riveting as I want the process to be. It's not going to be the style that I wanted. I much more preferred handheld stuff. But ever since then, I pretty much just wanted to pursue that full time, you know. I always wanted to write some kind of story. Didn't know how, but like I always wanted to make my own comic books. That was always the major goal of mine. And once that really started to cement itself, that was when we got into the issues with other stories like my previous comic lineup, or even Jackals. If we look at Jackals, Jackals was my original animation idea, the animation that I discussed in the one video, and that one I learned firsthand all the issues that I had with writing, because at the time I didn't think about how to make a story a whole story. I just kind of had like cool ideas that I wanted to put into something, and so you learn doing that. The story essentially has no end, because if you don't establish stuff like themes or arcs, then there's nothing to resolve itself. There's not really an ending to come from it.
A big part of that is because one of my favorite stories of all time at the time was The Walking Dead, which again, we've seen many issues with that.
But when I was crafting Jackals, I was slowly learning all of these tips, and that was when I realized Jackals has a very poor foundation, because I made it from the standpoint of like, oh, this is a cool idea, and then that, and then this, and then that. And that was the problem with all of my stories at the time that we mentioned in my junk pile video. So, from all of the little tips that I've picked up on, and a lot of like self-education that I did, when I say self-education, I mean like I looked to other people's resources, but kind of taught myself in that way using their information. Looking at all of those, I really think that my writing has gotten to a point where I at least know how to make a story now. The stories may not be the best, they may not be as airtight as they should be, but I at least know how to essentially bring a story from point A to point B, as they all should. I think it would be really fun to get into my actual writing process. So I'm going to be applying this in both my comics and the animation. The way that I always start off is I just start off with a brainstorm, right? I go and I'll write down, I'll usually do it on my phone actually. I'll go and write down my main concept for the story, and then from there I'll try and come up with the little building blocks and seeing what I like in those. I'll start off coming up with what do I want the general idea to be behind the story. Do I want it to be fear? Do I want it to be authority? Do I want it to be community? I'll go through that, and then I'll try and come up with some of the bigger parts and see how those can tie into that theme. The general way that I would do all of these is I would start with one idea and then try to build off of that. If that were the theme, then I would just try to build all of the building blocks relating to that. Or if it was more something like, oh, like I want to make a story within this genre, or maybe I would have a character idea. Then with those, I would ask myself, what's a good concept that relates to that? Then I would try to make that my theme. What I do after that is I go into a rough draft. This is no details as possible. This is just to get major plot points down. I don't want to write anything about how this ties back to a character or any smaller scene. I just want it to be like, okay, character goes into work, and then the building blows up, and then character goes and like grabs his weapons or whatever, stuff like that. So no details on the actual writing, it's just the basic points of what happens. And then from there, I will go and revise that as much as possible until I think that that is perfect. And then I go and take that into a summary. The summary is where I really start to get into all the details with it. That is where I start to say what emotions these characters are feeling in the moment, how this ties back to the theme in some way. And again, there I will revise that until it is perfect. And then I will go and write a script. So the summary is sort of a prose version of the actual story, but the script gets into dialogue, visual keys, stuff like that. And what I actually would like to do with my stories is sort of use both in tandem, so that when I'm crafting my stories, I'll have context for the actual situation, and then in the script I'll have what's actually going on, you know, in terms of what a character's saying or something that happens. I thought that would be a very nice way to do my stories, and I actually want to do the animation in the exact same way. So whenever I have my voice actors come and say that they're like sitting at a podium, right, and they've got like the microphone in front of them, they're going to be sitting there with two scripts, two documents. One is going to be the actual like dialogue and stuff like that, sound effects and such. The other one is going to be the summary, so then they can kind of get a quick revision or a quick summary on what the scene is actually about. So then when they go to voice, they actually know what they're trying to convey to the audience as they're doing it. I think that's my entire writing process, because the script is the most detailed that it gets before I start to make the actual final product. So from here on out, I actually want to start getting into the actual rules and tips, so on and so forth, that I've used to help me in this entire writing process that I just showed you guys. This is the biggest one, and I want to get it out of the way because once I establish this, it's gonna provide much better context and knowledge on the other points that we're gonna have. So then if you're confused about those, hopefully they'll connect back to this one rule in some way. The way that I see it, the best way to craft a story is to find one theme, just one. I've said it with all these. What do I want the story to be about? Do I want it to be about fear? Do I want it to be about family? Do I want it to be about revenge? Find one concept and craft your entire story around that. Now, I know what you're saying, but Carter, doesn't that sound like it could possibly get the story into a place where there's not much variance in the actual writing and ideas being passed around? Potentially, if you have a restrictive enough concept. But what I've noticed with all the stories that I've developed, you find that if you have one, a broad enough idea to start out with, and two, characters and details that are fleshed out enough and complex enough, then you'll find that other ideas come into those on their own. You know, you're always going to have multiple themes in it, but when it comes to crafting the story, start with one, make it broad, and build the story from there. And if you do it right, then you'll find that there are other details and other themes that'll come in that can convey other ideas, ones that will help when it comes to the fear of no variance in your messages, you know? So if we look at, say, the Aces comic, which is the one that's kind of my test run comic, it's mainly about community, right? It's all about a post-apocalyptic group trying to build a solid foundation for society. There are other ideas that come into that. There are ones of the coming of age, you know? You've got characters in there who really need to start adapting to this world, and they really grow up, you know? They really gain a side of themselves that they would have been too afraid to before. That you've also got themes of sacrifice, you know? You've got characters who are too selfish in their own endeavors, that they're actually harming the community that they're a part of. And so once they sacrifice that urge of theirs, that need of theirs, you see that they help out the community. See, this is what I mean, is that if you develop the story deep enough, then you'll find that you do have multiple ideas flowing through it. If anyone is still either a bit confused or they disagree, this is another way that I like to put it. I have an analogy for writing stories. The way that I see it is that your story is a puzzle, right? It's a jigsaw puzzle. You can put in any little piece that you want to, right? You know, you could put in this character, you can put in this set piece, you can put in this chunk of dialogue, you can put in this one scene. But the goal is to make it all come together to make one solid picture. And what do I see that picture as? I see it as the overall theme. I see it as that one major concept that you're trying to get across to the audience. Now, the way that I break up theme when I'm developing my story is I start off with the major concept, and then I'll go and try and pick a lesson out of that. Because once you get that lesson, you will then have essentially a starting motivation for your main character, right? So say it's one about, let's stick with Hail the Red Storm, about authority, right? What I pulled out of that is that sometimes the best way to go is to go your own way, even if it's against the people who are above you, right? And so that right there lays out a perfect base for motivation for the main character, you know? A lot of people in his life that would be considered higher ups or authority don't give him any respect because he's a younger kid. But once he's put into a situation where he can really exercise his capabilities, you see him go against all of that, and you see him trying to become a more mature person and a more authoritative person as it goes. So that's what I would consider to be the most important thing in a story, is starting out with that one concept, finding a lesson within it, and then just running from there. Now, I bet some of you are wondering, how do you run from there? Well, the way that I see it is, you just need to ask the question of why. Now, if you have a good enough idea for a story, or if you really are passionate about making a story, you probably already know some of these things, right? You probably already know what genre it's in, what characters there are going to be, what set piece it's going to have, the dialogue, stuff like that. You probably already have some ideas of this. But if you want to try and keep the story consistent, you just need to ask the question of why. When you have an idea that you want to put into your story, say, oh, I think it would be really cool if, say in chapter 10, the characters run off and they go, sorry, I thought I saw something back there. The characters go and they like steal this car and then they drive to the location to steal that item. Okay, why? And then if you ask the question why right enough, and if you answer well enough, then you will eventually follow that little rabbit trail back to your theme, right? So again, Hail the Red Storm, you've got your main character and he's struggling right now. That's his biggest thing, is that no one will take him seriously. Why? Because he's trying to do something that goes against his authority figures. Why? Because he understands that sometimes the best choices to make go against the wishes of people above you. That's the theme right there. That's the concept. It goes back to authority, right? That's a great way to do it. I mentioned a little something in my Walking Dead video that I want to bring up again. A lot of people tried to say that the theme of that story, of The Walking Dead, was survival. That didn't make sense to me, because The Walking Dead is about survival within the plot. It can't be the theme. Another way that I like to look at it is you can figure out the major building blocks of your story. You can figure out the plot, you can figure out the characters, and you can figure out the theme. So I used the example of a story being about Joe wanting to go buy groceries for his wife, right? That's the story. Well, what is the plot? Groceries are being purchased. If you notice there, I haven't mentioned any characters yet. Why? Because Joe wants to get groceries for his wife while she's at work. That right there not only establishes a character, but it establishes a motivation. And then you ask, why does Joe want to buy his wife groceries while she's at work? Because he honors doing good things for your loved ones. The act of sacrifice and doing good deeds. That's the theme. So you have your plot, you have your character with the motivation, and you have your general lesson and theme behind it. So again, going back to The Walking Dead, my problem there was, if you follow that train of thinking that I just established, which has helped me out a lot in making my stories, you can't say that it's about survival, because what is the story about? It's about a group surviving. Why? Because of survival. Do you know what I mean? Because when you don't have that theme there that's different from the plot, you also can't come up with your character's motivation. You can't come up with who the character is and why they're doing what they do. What is the story about? It's about survival, right? They're trying to live in the apocalypse. Why? Because the character wants to survive. Why? Because of survival. But yeah, that's how I like to follow it, with the question of why. And another thing too, when it comes to making this story stuff, essentially what you gotta do is you just gotta try and find all the pieces that you like and just try to connect the string to each one to make it all come together. These next two rules are gonna be a little more specific when it comes to the actual writing process, rather than just the development of the story. Actually, no, I think there's 3 rules. Let's make it 3. The first one thing that I've learned about recently that has been a major help, and I actually kind of like knew about it in the past, like I've tried to implement it, but I didn't know it was actually a thing, you know, if that makes any sense. And that is Chekhov's gun. If anybody doesn't know what that is, Chekhov's gun is essentially the idea that if you have a character shooting a gun in the 3rd act of a movie, then you need to show that gun hanging up on the wall in the 1st act, or something like that, rough translation. Essentially saying anything that's in a story, it needs to have a cause and an effect, you know? It needs to be established in some way, and it also needs to have a payoff. So if you're just gonna introduce something, but then it doesn't go anywhere, that could be a problem. If you're gonna have something happen, but you don't know where that came from, that can also be a problem. So a good example for this from my own writing is actually when I was writing Jackals. Even though I scrapped that story, it did have some good parts, and one of them was there was a scene where one of the characters, Tara, is fighting one of the villains, right? And the villain is very strong. It's kind of waning her powers, you know? Her powers aren't really holding up against this enemy. Then, after a fight that she just had with her father, David, he comes in and he like drives up, hits the villain with his car or his truck, and gets out and starts to shoot it with a shotgun, trying to help out Tara. And this whole fight beforehand was establishing he was actually completely against Tara using her powers as a superhero, and so to see him actually step in and help her out in this way really shows a growth in him. Now, that gun is a big thing that he was using. He wouldn't have been able to do what he did if he didn't have that shotgun on him. And so I had a really cool idea that since his character was all about humans achieving things on their own rather than relying on superpowers, that was kind of his big motivation and dynamic as a character. Hell yeah. Before any of the kids have actually revealed that they have superpowers yet, and he thinks that they're just normal people, he tries to show them ways that they can defend themselves against an adversary or an outer threat. And he actually shows them his shotgun, and he's like, you don't need superpowers when you got one of these. You know, he's a big gun enthusiast, so he shows like his prized shotgun. And he uses that later on to help Tara. You know, when I was developing the story, I had that scene there where he helps Tara, but I didn't know where the shotgun came from. So I wrote in that scene back there. And that's the whole idea of Chekhov's gun. This is another one too that I just learned recently. Coincidences shouldn't save characters, because that's just plot armor. Coincidences can threaten characters, they can put them in peril, so like something that is completely just luck, that can put a character in danger. But when it comes to saving the character, it works much better if someone is actually making a choice. And this is a big thing, is when it comes to stories, you really don't want to rely on randomness to really do anything for a story. Let's say you have two superheroes. They're both fighting, right? They're both having a big battle. Turns out that one of them has a weakness of water. And so while the fight is going on, he's starting to get the upper hand, but then you see it starts to rain. And he's like, shit, like, what do I do now? So he tries to find some creative way to get the upper hand again in the fight to take down the other superhero. Switch it around and have it to where he's starting to get the lower hand, like he's starting to get defeated, but then a storm randomly comes in and he starts to heal up. Instead of water being his weakness, it's his strength. So he starts to actually get stronger from it. How exciting is that? I think we all have a general idea that the best moments in stories are when characters make unique or clever choices that save them later on down the line. Random occurrences can certainly put them in danger, but when something random saves them, it doesn't make much sense, because like, why is it there? And second off, it's not as satisfying to watch as an audience member, because no one did anything for them to be saved. Because when someone does something, that truly shows their growth as a character and why they are the hero. It shows why they're in this position to achieve their greater goal, because they have the competence for it. This is one that I found quite interesting, that I actually developed not completely on my own, but it was a formula that I sort of developed myself. It's the breakdown of A, B, and C characters. Or in other words, a character that is extremely important to the story, one that's semi-important, and one that's just kind of there for some part. There are 3 parts to all of these characters that can be established, right? And the way that I see it is, if you have all 3, that's an A character. If you only have 2 of them, it's a B. Only 1 of them, C. So if a character, an A character, has a motivation, an arc of some kind, you see a change in their character, and they have a low point. The low point is what I define as their flaw getting to them the most, right? So say you have a character who has a problem with violence, that's his flaw, is that he has a very short temper and he gets to be too aggressive. His low point could be that he brutally beats somebody to the point of nearly killing them. And you see them get punished from that, you see them actually go through and suffer the consequences of that, which really hinders on whatever journey or goal that they're trying to achieve. That's a good low point, right? Have that in there. So an A character is arc, motivation, and low point. If you have a B character, all you really need is just a motivation and an arc. They don't necessarily need their low point because their flaw isn't as important to the story. And then if you have a C character, the lowest one, all you really need to do is establish a motivation. If a character takes up any time within the story, I think that every single one of them should have some kind of motivation. It's okay for motivations to overlap, you know? So say you even just have two characters who, like, they see that one guy over there finally got a bunch of gold that he needs for his whole journey. Those two, they want to steal that gold. So all you see of them is just grab the gold and then run away. And that's all that you see of their characters. That's enough, though. That's a motivation. And that's the way that I break it down, is have a character that has at least a motivation, if not just a motivation and an arc. And if not just those two, then add in a low point. Don't have a character that doesn't have any of those. If you can't figure out what the motivation even is of a character, you don't have a character. You have a cardboard cutout. You have a fill-in. Now, this puppy right here is actually a journal that I started to write in for the animation project. This was after I completely scrapped Jackals and I wanted to start fresh. So this one covers the whole plot that eventually led up to the story that we're at right now. And I've marked some of the tips that I've written in this book, and I want to read them off because I find them really important. This one I really, really like. This one is the Martha test. I actually got this from Filmento, a big YouTube channel who discusses like good writing tips for movies and such. The Martha test goes as this. I'm just gonna read it straight out of the journal. Have you ever watched a movie and seen the main conflict that's driving the plot and asked yourself, is this necessary? Why don't they do this or that? When writing a conflict for a story, that conflict needs to be strong enough that there's no room for compromise or any more logical solution, and each party needs the strongest motivation possible. This could either be a time-sensitive need or a very compelling personal want. So you can break this down, I think, into 3 different options. When you're trying to look for a character's motivation on why they're doing something, it needs to be either the most logical solution, it needs to be the only solution, or it needs to be one that may not be either, but within their character, they won't let it be another way. A good one for that is Breaking Bad. You know, if you look at Walter White and the choices that he's making, obviously there are much more logical solutions to every occurrence that happens within the story. But if you really understand what Walter White is as a character, as long as who, you know that of course he's going to choose what he just did, because that is Walter White, you know? Obviously there are plenty of good solutions to provide money for your family when you pass away, but he doesn't want to do that because you know deep down it's not actually about making that money, it's about him stepping into a field that he feels like he can truly be himself and do things the way that he wants to. So that's the Martha test. The next one that I want to go to is what I call the Walking Dead fallacy. When writing a story, everything that is put in should neatly fit in with the rest. Like a nice puzzle, this ties into the importance of theme and the question of why and all that. More importantly, it should all connect back to the theme, which is the central concept or idea. This includes the background, the setting, and the world building. Let's look at 2 stories, Breaking Bad and The Walking Dead. In Breaking Bad, a story about a man newly entering the drug scene. Why is the main threat the cartel and the DEA? Because they could stop him dead in his tracks. Why is it in New Mexico? Because that's a hot spot for drug dealing. Everything in that story fits perfectly with the plot. Now, The Walking Dead, the walkers are claimed to be the main threat. At least, they're the source of the show even being a thing. Yet, no plot points in the show, except for some parts of the first 2 seasons, have anything to do with walkers themselves. The walkers are really just filler for shock and action and horror. The plot could be the exact same beat and structure in an alien apocalypse, or a Wrath of God scenario, or even just regular life. The undead are really just for aesthetic after a while. And make sure you do not do this mistake. That was one thing that I had a lot in my mind when it came to especially making Hail the Red Storm, is it's like, why am I choosing that creature? What does that creature contribute to the plot? And what does it also contribute to the theme overall? Another good example to look at this is The Last of Us, right? The Last of Us works a lot within the first game because the plot there is all about the cure, right? It's about the vaccine or whatever for the cordyceps and the infected in that world. That's what the whole story about Joel and Ellie is. Now, I'm not saying that that's the only thing. I understand that it grows into something much more, but the established idea makes a lot of sense. You're in a post-apocalyptic world with infected people. The start of the plot is all about trying to cure that. The problem with The Last of Us 2 is that that plot has nothing to do with the pre-established world. So, plot-wise, it has no connection to the previous story. And that's my problem with it. It has nothing to do with actual infected people. So then why is it in an apocalypse in the first place? And that is something that I've really tried to keep in mind when it comes to making my stories. Oh, I was just about to close this up. There's actually one more thing that I want to get into. I have a whole page just with little writing tips that I want to discuss. I think at this point I'm just going to read through all of them, so I'm sorry if I repeat some that I've already said within the video, but I'm just going to get right into the list. Number 1, do not be married to individual scenes. Number 2, the moral of the story depends on how the audience takes it, not how you intend it. Number 3, make sure you write a strict magic system. Not all magic is a Deus Ex Machina. That's pretty specific for certain genres. Every scene should have more than one purpose within it, whether that be carrying along the plot, showing the theme in some way, growing a character's arc or motivation, such as that. Number 5, if you feel bored or even lost, the pacing is off. So if you feel like a scene is going on for too long, that's pacing generally. If you feel like something ended and you're kind of confused on where you're at, that's because it was paced too quickly. Now, this isn't a 100%. This whole rule, there are definitely other factors that come into it. But generally, if you're kind of wondering where you're at in the plot or you feel like nothing's really happening yet, that's pacing. Number 6, events should happen because one character made a decision, making the flow of events feel organic. Events should not be random and convenient. I've talked about this a lot already. Number 7 is Chekhov's gun. Everything in a story should be established and then finished in some way. Number 8, a protagonist, if written well, should start with an ignorant want, which is then taken over by their true need. Number 9, a good protagonist should be active and make decisions that push the plot. The alternative is a passive protagonist who merely just responds to the flow of events instead of influencing them. Make the hero active, not passive. And the biggest thing that I want to establish in this entire discussion, none of these rules are absolute. It is writing, not math, right? Anything that comes to the creative arts. It doesn't necessarily matter how you got there, so long as you're staying consistent with your own process. I don't want anyone to hear these rules that I have and think, okay, well, I have to do those to make a story. Not at all. There are plenty of writers who do things much differently than I do. There are going to be plenty of writers that most likely disagree with how I write. And it's okay to say that your rules are not absolute. Blake Snyder. Save the cat. I started an actual cough in that. Whoops. That's what I want to finish this off with, is that I'm not here to tell you guys what to do. I just more want to add clarification to my own process, so then when you guys read my stories in the future, or you hear me discussing my stories, you have more of an understanding on where I'm actually coming from within my own mental process. I have one more thing to add to this video before I finish it off. If you guys have noticed in this video, I've tried to add a lot more fun, zany moments that have a lot of editing to go into them to really try and provide some comedic style to the videos. I personally had a lot of fun with it, and I want to know if that's something that I should try and keep up with my videos in the future. I tried to create this video as I did my videos on my Zeke channel previously to this channel, and those ones I was always trying to find fun moments where I could slip in a joke or have an excuse to put in like a fun edit or something like that, or just have insane moments that can really provide some entertainment to the audience. And I really want to keep doing it, and I would love to know what you guys think about that. If I shouldn't do it and keep this more to an informative style, or if I should keep going with that and try and add some personality to the videos. But that's all that I have to say. So thank you guys so much for watching. This was Carter Sandovan with Sandbox Illustration. Make sure to check in the description for links to more of my content, and then like the video, comment on it, and subscribe for weekly art-related videos. Anyways, have fun, dudes.